I'd like to welcome everybody to the Public Safety Committee meeting for October 8th. We can go around the room and say who's here. I'm Chairman Terry Goodwin, Alderman Ward 4.
Janet Garten, Alderman Ward 5.
Jim Jones, Hendersonville Police.
Mayor Jamie Cleary.
Mark Burgdorf, Alderman Ward 1.
Just a citizen.
Sarah Locke, Public Works.
George Edwards, Hendersonville Fire Department.
Rachel Collins, Alderman Ward 5.
We have some guests.
Frank Vincent from Ward 4.
Lance back there.
Sorry. Lance Ray, City Attorney.
Do I have a motion to
Don't need
accept
to.
the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Do I have a motion for the approval of the July 9th minutes?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one signed up for public comments. Now we'll go to ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 2024-16, an ordinance to be known as the Safe Neighborhoods Ordinance, amending the Hendersonville Municipal Code, Title 15, Motor Vehicles, Traffic and Parking, Chapter 3, Speed Limits, to review and address speed limits, particularly in residential areas of the city of Hendersonville. Do I have a motion to discuss that?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Who would like to talk about that?
Well, I have questions.
Sure.
What is considered a local, like, for example, Saundersville Road north of the bypass, Indian Lake, Cherokee, Bonita, Cages Bend, not Cages Bend, Sanders Ferry, Wallace Ferry, West Hampton.
So,
Eddie, we need you.
almost every one of the roadways you listed is going to be classified as either a collector or an arterial, so they would not qualify.
Which one wasn't?
I just didn't know if I missed one, but all of the ones that I
Okay.
recall,
Okay.
like Sanders Ferry,
That's what I was
Cages Bend,
thinking.
all of those major roads that are collecting from all
Sorry.
those side streets and have much higher volume, those are all going to be classified higher, so those speed limits would remain the same. This would be more for those side streets where it is just all residential houses.
And what do you anticipate for a change of behavior? Okay.
Typically the data shows that speed limit changes do not necessarily change driver behavior unless the roadway streetscape has also changed to modify the behavior, because most people, most good law-abiding citizens who want to do the right thing, they still tend to drive as comfortable as the roadway feels.
What we see, if you don't mind me interjecting, but what we see, first of all, I pulled the crash data for the last 3 years, and that was one of the questions I have. The major connector roads is what we would call them, but the majority of all of our crashes are on Main Street, New Shackle, Indian Lake Boulevard, and the bypass. If I take out the connector roads from that data, probably less than 8% of the crashes we work are even in a residential area, and I did not filter out parking lot crashes because we were having a little trouble with the data that we were gathering. So it may even be lower than originally. If you leave in the connector roads, we were at 12% over the last 3 years of crashes were on those non-major roads that I just listed. But if you do take out the connector roads or collector roads, I'm sorry, whichever term you use, but the major arteries like Saunders Ferry, Walt Ferry, Saundersville, some of the bigger roads, you're going to be down lower than 8%. And most of what we see, the crashes in those areas in what you would consider a residential area are not even speed related. It's because somebody's not paying attention, maybe on their cell phone, fooling with the radio, and they run a stop sign. Or, they back out of the drive. We consider that a crash. They're backing out of their driveway and backed into a car parked across the street. We consider that a crash. They're not speed related crashes to begin with. And so we get complaints frequently from citizens that say, hey, they're speeding in my neighborhood. And we send officers out with radar, and what we find is, they're actually, the speed limit's 30, they're driving 28, 30, 31, right in that range. But to people standing on the side of the road, they feel like it's much faster. And I get that. Literally, we've actually had officers allow the citizen that's complaining to stand there with them and say, they go, well, that car's flying. Okay, they clock it, and it's not. It's 30, 31, 32 miles an hour on a fairly straight, narrow, straight level residential street. It just looks like they're going fast. I will tell you from experience, smaller cars appear to be traveling faster than larger cars also, when in reality they're not.
Sarah, I have a question for you. So I know you said the collector or connector, whatever you want to call them, but how do we actually define what constitutes residential? Because like Indian Lake, all the way back, my ward, there's no commercial or anything around there like Walton Ferry, Saunders Ferry. If you're to reduce the speed limit to 25 on Cherokee Road, for example, or way back Indian Lake, that's going to be an issue. So how are you going to define residential in those areas?
So what we would start from and what we have started looking at is it's not completely related, but the current land use and transportation plan that we have on the website, it defines the major classified roadways. So it shows Cherokee and Indian Lake and Sanders Ferry and Walton Ferry and all of those major collectors and arterials. It shows those already mapped out and classified. So right off the bat, those would not qualify. So then the side streets off of those roadways that we would consider local, any of those local streets that are not classified on that map, then if they're purely residential, that's what we would be looking at.
Okay, so I have another question for you. So basically, will this just mainly apply to subdivisions and areas, strictly smaller residential areas? And do we not have a traffic engineer or had a traffic engineer that sets the speed limits for safety?
So it would apply to, isolated residential subdivisions, but it would also apply to other purely residential areas that aren't collectors or arterials. And then we do, we haven't had a traffic engineer for about 3 years now. We have a new one coming on staff in end of October. Very excited about that. But typically speed limits are changed based on, without an ordinance, they're changed based on an engineering traffic study. So we have looked at multiple, but we don't just proactively analyze all of the speed limits in the city. It requires a lot of resources.
And then I have one more question for you. So I've been reading the different codes and all of that for the last little bit. Would we have to, and tell me if I'm misinterpreting this, would we have to replace all of those speed limit signs? Or if we pass this ordinance and get it down to 25 miles an hour in our ordinance, that becomes the default speed limits in the residential area. If we removed the 30 mile an hour speed limit signs, are we required to, since that would be in place, are we required to go back in and put 25 mile an hour speed limits? And if we are, can you estimate a cost of manpower, signs, all of that? I'm trying to justify in my mind, is 5 miles an hour going to be worth $200,000?
So I think that we're not required to post speed limits. I might defer to Chief Jones a little bit on that. I think that that's maybe an issue of what's enforceable, maybe, but I don't think that there's any statute that requires us to sign the speed limits if we have a default speed limit for the city. Now, based on what's currently contained within the ordinance, the estimate that we came up with in the staff report was based on very high level. We have a lot of survey work to do to confirm that number, but that's based on replacing all of the existing local residential speed limits that exceed the new default that's being proposed of 25 miles per hour. And it also includes an estimate of some portion of those needing new posts. While we're there, we may as well replace the posts.
Are there many areas that have 25 now, or are most of them 30?
There are quite a few areas that do have 25 already. And but there a lot of the older neighborhoods, older areas, they are either not posted or they're typically posted at 30 or 35.
In our ward, for example, on Saundersville Road, north of the bypass, some of the neighborhoods are 30, some are 25. And so I get a lot of complaints saying people are speeding. Why do they get a lower speed limit than what we get? And I was under, until I read this, I was under the impression it kind of depended on when the neighborhood was built and what the standards were at that time. But now I understand it as the width of the road and the spacing of the homes and so on. But well, Jana, did you have questions before I was like, okay. So right now, like if we get a complaint, we talk to you about it and it goes to traffic and parking committee, that's probably not the right name.
That's right.
And y'all are backed up.
We are currently for traffic studies and evaluations for speed limit, just because of the resources it takes for the data collection and to perform, those evaluations. Not having a traffic engineer on staff is definitely.
And it can be a while before it even reaches the top of the list to be on your agenda though, right?
That's right.
So if I turned in one today, when would you anticipate being able to actually evaluate it properly?
With the backlog we have right now, unfortunately, I would say at least 6 months when they start working through some of those requests.
Okay. So when the traffic engineer comes on, we'll be able to handle that. That's the resource you need, and that's happening this month, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And for you, we have two of the, I don't know what they're called, the mobile radar things that flash at you and tell you how fast you're going.
You're talking about the trailers, no, we don't have them anymore. We had one, we had loaned it to Parks because it was very old and it had a lot of operational issues. We do have the data collector signs that we can go out and post. And what that does is not only it will flash the speed, they can set it different ways, but it'll flash the speed. But it's a data collector for our traffic division to do a traffic. I mean, it's not as scientific as what Public Works does, but it basically it'll record the speed of every vehicle that comes through and then give you an average of like the average speed, the high speed, can generate a report based on that collection.
How many of those do we have?
I think we have 3 or 4 of them. I'm not sure. I'd have to check for sure. I can actually find out real quick.
But you know that I have requested those from time to time, and they have been so appreciated in the neighborhoods. It helps people understand, like you were saying, how fast is that car actually going? And it does provide at least some feedback on if enforcement is an issue there.
It does.
I would be interested in getting more of those. Do you know how much they cost?
I do not know offhand. We have just a radar data collector, and when we purchased that probably 6 or 7 years ago, it was around $4,000. So
That's not too much.
with if it had the radar, the feedback, and that would add to the cost, of course.
Okay.
Ours is just a little box that collects the data.
I know it's anecdotal, but Winbrook HOA installed those signs, and they recently sent them to be serviced before the warranty was over or get new batteries or something. And while they were gone, people said people are definitely driving faster without them. So I think that those, I know it's anecdotal, but you're saying yes, those are a traffic calming measure that works.
Those are very effective.
We find they help when we put them out, but we have to send somebody out to install them. And then we'll leave them up for a week, and then they have to go back out and collect them and then run the report off of them.
And so in this HOA, they're permanent.
They're
The
permanent.
HOA did that, but, because this speeding is one of the biggest things that I get phone calls about. And, I'm not sure, I mean, you just told us this isn't gonna really change behavior. You disagree?
I disagree.
Okay.
I think the majority of our citizens obey the law. And I think by reducing the speed limit, a majority of our citizens will obey the law. Nashville has done this. And according to some reports that I've read, and I can get you those reports, it has worked in Nashville. It has helped slow down traffic in neighborhoods. The big issue here, one of the big issues is equity.
I agree with that.
How can I tell my older neighborhoods
I
that
agree.
you don't deserve the same speed limit as newer neighborhoods? That's an argument. You can talk about engineering studies, but all you want to, but I can't address that equity argument.
Especially when the neighborhoods connect to one another.
Well, and these
And now,
older,
and they're not the same speed limit.
and the
It doesn't
older
make
neighborhoods, a
sense.
lot of them don't have sidewalks. So people walk on the street. You know, if we can slow the majority of traffic down 5 miles an hour, this is not a panacea. This is not, a magic bullet. But by God, it's a start. It's a
And
start.
they will give enforcement more teeth.
Yes. Yes. So I've heard the saying, and you won't comment on this, you shouldn't, but I've heard the saying is that I'm going to drive 10 miles over the speed limit. If it's 25, I'm going to drive 35. If it's 30, I'm going to drive 40. If it's 35, I'm going to drive 40. You get my drift?
I was always told you can get away with 10,
Well,
you can't get away with 11.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I'm just saying, that I think Nashville has proven that it does help. I think that the majority of citizens will comply with the law. And I think it's a good first step. It's not an easy subject dealing with speeders, and PD knows this. But it seems to me, especially since COVID, people are speeding more in our neighborhoods. And like you, I get complaints from this all the time. So this is a good first step. This is not, maybe we need to get more of those radar, solar radar signs to show the speed. But this is a good first step in addressing the equity argument that every speed limit in a residential neighborhood in Hendersonville will be 25 miles an hour. You don't have to think about it. It's 25 miles an hour. And if there's a sign not showing,
it's
the
statutory.
default is 25 now, just like Nashville did it. In fact, Nashville had so much success in doing this. Mayor Cooper started it. He initiated it. They've had so much success with the default, changing the default to 25, that now they're starting to trial connectors. So they are expanding, reducing the speed limit. Now, I don't know that's what we want to do, but I'm just saying, if it was not being successful, Nashville wouldn't take this next step to even address connectors.
What about enforcement? Do you need more resources for enforcement?
Well, I mean, we get from,
Me.
well, not just you,
Continuously.
but, I mean, I get calls from aldermen. We get calls from citizens, we get emails from citizens, and we
online
respond to them. And we send our traffic officers out and our patrol officers, when they're not answering calls, try to go out and hit those areas, but there's only so many people and so much time to go out and try to, work the neighborhoods. We've sent them out and they'll hit where they can. And, if they're speeding, they're gonna write a citation. Unless it's 1 or 2 miles an hour, they're gonna get a verbal warning. I will tell you that they're much less forgiving in residential areas than they would be on Gallatin Road or the bypass.
Yeah.
Somebody's going over the speed limit. Same way that, there's, to be honest with you, there's zero sympathy in the school zone if you're breaking the speed limit. And that one will,
There shouldn't be.
there shouldn't be. And so, but, their results when they go out there and do that are not huge
It's hit or miss.
when they go out and work those areas.
I
Just
know that
because-
you're trying to hire people, and Alderman Roberson put forth, and we all agreed with having a hiring bonus. And I'm wondering if there should be people dedicated to enforcement, or
Well, there are. There's our traffic
More people.
division. That's exactly what they
more
do.
people.
Well,
Yes.
we can't keep pulling from patrol. We have an opening in traffic right now, and we're wanting to get that filled, which will help. But, the reality is there's only so many of them, and they have other stuff to do.
And like you
Working
said,
crashes.
this isn't where the crashes happen.
Right. And so our patrol officers, a lot of times when they're not busy on calls, they're focused on the major roadways where the crashes happen. Same way with our traffic division, but if they're not working traffic enforcement, they're actually usually working a crash somewhere. We get enough of them on Main Street and bypass. Short plug, one of the things we started putting out on Facebook is called Traffic Tuesday or Traffic Tips for Tuesday.
Yeah.
And trying to give people just a reminder, heads up, this is causing an issue. But we send them out, they go out every day and they try to work different areas. But with as many complaints as we get, we have to keep spreading them around all over town so they're not focused, they can't focus on just one area. And we get the complaints. We put the traffic data recorders out. We've got 4 of them. The ones we got were 3,000 each. And again, they're a little different, but I told you I couldn't remember exactly, but it's 4 of them, and we paid 3,000.
Okay.
So
3,000?
for the ones that we have, and they're a little different than the ones at Public Works. Public Works is more,
More sophisticated.
sophisticated, I
More
would
of a
say.
data
than-
gathering tool.
Yeah, and so this one does that, but it's only associated with how many vehicles, what's the speeds. And a lot of times we put those up in a neighborhood and we find out that the average speed of the majority of the vehicles is less than the posted speed limit. So,
Yeah, I think sometimes where we miss is we don't follow up and let the neighbors know what we found and kind of correct the misconception, if there is a misconception, or validate that they did the right thing by letting us know because they do have a problem,
Well,
whichever it turns out to be.
plenty of times what I do is respond to their emails and let them know that, hey, thank you for letting us know. If you continue to see a problem, call us back. But here's,
Here's the information.
yeah.
To call my
So would
constituents back.
Would it be helpful to have more of those? Do you have the
Sure.
manpower to
We'll
utilize
try to
more?
find a way to put more up. They have to know what they're doing when they're putting them up because they have to, and we find those are much better than the old speed trailer anyway, because they don't take up room on the side of the roadway. And if you're talking already narrow residential street, putting a speed trailer out there is not a good
So,
idea.
yeah, I know.
It just creates an additional
And
hassle.
everybody wants one, but they don't want it in front of their house.
That.
I
But the
found
great
that
thing
an
about the
issue.
ones we have, we can mount them to a utility pole or a signpost, and they'll be there and collect the data for 7 days. So
Sarah, never heard the cost that you said, the dollar amount.
Just very high level preliminary estimate. We came up with around 160,000.
And Alderman Bergdorf, you had a question?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We've had a lot of great discussion tonight regarding this, and I support Alderman Robertson's ordinance wholeheartedly. Because as I was raising my family on Cumberland Shores in Ward 1, that's a pass-through road from Walton Ferry to Harbor to Rockland. And it's a beautiful road. It's smooth, thanks to all the paving. And it is a nice road to travel on. But I was only worried 2 times a day, AM and PM, for my 4 sons out there in the middle of the road. They're my children, so they're not real bright. But so I think this is a great place to start, like Alderman Robertson said, number 1. Number 2, he brought this up in the Public Works, correct? That when you first brought it up, yes. And so we discussed at that period, just at that moment, about payment. It sounds like a safety issue, and I'm wondering if we can't get a safety grant from GNRC or one of the other agencies in the area, TDOT, to help pay for this sort of thing. So those are my 2 comments on that. But thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
I'd like to make a motion to go on and send it to BOMA for more discussion at BOMA.
With a positive recommendation. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other agenda items? Nobody? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye, sorry.
So